It's the Underdogs back with you for another week. I'm Jordan Brenner, joined by my co-host, used to be Peter Keating, but now he appears to be Steve Bartman dressed up as a Mets fan. What the hell are you celebrating, you dork?
Jordan, there's no wanting Matt Holliday, but getting Jason Bay. There's no missing out on A-Rod. There's no missing out on Ken Griffey Jr. This year, the Mets, the most storied underdog franchise in sports history. Of course, we are the underdogs. The Mets have always been underdogs to the big brother, evil empire, U.S. steel magnate known as the Yankees. Except for this week, Jordan, when they signed Hall of Famer to be Juan Soto right out from under the nose of the Steinbrenner complex,
I,
Steinbrenner Industrial Complex. So we're celebrating Juan Soto going to the best team in New York. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo.
if you're observing this through an audio
Woo-hoo.
medium right now, not visual, this idiot is wearing a 1980s Mets jacket, an ugly black Mets hat.
That's
He's
right.
got a cigar that he seems to be biting on because he's clearly
Uh-huh.
never smoked one before, and a
Uh-huh.
bottle of cheap champagne.
All
It's
right.
really, he is just absolutely disgracing himself, and he
That
really
and my
does look
dog.
like
That,
Steve
that and my
Bartman.
dog is all I need for about an entire 4 day stretch, Jordan. And we're in the middle of that stretch, celebrating right now. I think
Yeah.
the
Well,
Mets cap
congrats
has a
on winning the offseason. It's about as meaningful as any of the other past 38 seasons you've played in Flushing. So,
well, Jordan, that is a below replacement level insult. As will be the Yankees outfield next year.
yeah. I can already see which injury will Juan Soto suffer from first, and will it happen in spring training, or will they get 2 weeks out of him?
I don't know. Will you be over your injured pride by then?
I have no
Hey,
pride.
hey, at the MLB awards dinner, we can move on after this. We don't have to
Oh,
linger on
can
this.
we? Thanks,
But I
Peter. I
just want to say
appreciate it.
at the MLB awards dinner,
Yeah.
Mookie Betts won something, and they talked about what a great bowler he was because he bowls. He's good at everything. He bowls,
Yes.
and they said he bowled a 300 game. He had to throw 12 perfect strikes, and by coincidence, that was also the Yankees' plan for pitching to Freddie Freeman in the World Series.
Anyway, we actually have something interesting to talk about as opposed to whatever's coming out of Peter's mouth, and that we finally have a college football bracket. It's out.
We
And
do.
before we go searching for upsets in the first round, I just want to say, Peter, I think by and large the committee got it right, given the constraints put upon them in terms of where they had to place teams, the fact that conference champions had to be the top four seeds. I think they got the seeding right, and I think they got the decision right with Alabama against SMU.
Well, I was slapped around on this podcast just 1 week ago oh, that's right, by you for spending too much time criticizing the structure. So let's say, given the structure, as you're saying, this is a reasonable set of teams, except I want to ask you about one thing. Do you think they did enough to protect the path? We'll talk about some of the numbers about this later. Protect the path of Oregon, who's been sitting on top of the charts for weeks now, while everyone else churns around underneath them. Do you think they gave them a clear enough path to a title game or the Final Four? Because the way that's structured now, they're likely to actually run. They're more likely to run into a buzzsaw than a couple of the other teams that are up there. You know what I'm saying? Is Oregon in a good enough situation? While we're arguing about the bubble, what about the best team in the country?
I mean, no, but again, that's not the fault of the committee. It's the fault of the way the playoff was structured. So
All right.
it was unavoidable. They couldn't. Once you force Arizona State and Boise State into the 3-4 seed, then yes, you end up with a situation like Oregon, and obviously it has to be fixed going forward. But let's get into the matchups because we're really concerned with upsets on this show, as it is in our title. We are the underdogs. First thing to notice that each of these games, Peter, has a spread of a touchdown or more. So these are not expected to be nail biting, crazy tight finishes. But I thought it'd be fun if we went into these four matchups and sort of decided which was our most likely to least likely upset, or the other way around. I think we both agree on the game that has the least likely chance of an upset, right?
Yeah, and before we get into that, I just want to say I think you're right. These games are not expected to be all that competitive, and that's not just a function of home field advantage. The teams that are favored are actually would be favored on a neutral field by I think more than a field goal, right? In all cases, and then you add that home field advantage, it's going to be a tough road for most of these underdogs.
Right. But I think we would agree the toughest road and just the least impressive team in our our mind is Clemson um, taking on Texas. God, I came away even though Clemson beat SMU, I came away from that game feeling like I'd rather bank on SMU going forward than Clemson. And I just think Texas is, especially their defense, is so tough that I have a hard time seeing Clemson hanging with the Longhorns over the long haul.
It's funny. One of the reasons why Oregon, why we're not sure about what the ultimate title game is going to be, because Texas and also Ohio State managed to play themselves down a couple of bumps, right, in the last couple of weeks. But Texas is a really strong team, and Clemson. I mean, I hate to say that the final result matters less than how you got there, but Clemson had a bunch of lucky plays, especially early on against SMU, and only managed to pull it out by 3. And I had that same feeling you're talking about, which is like, who do you think is going to be more dangerous going forward? I don't know. I don't think either one of us has been all that impressed by Clemson's the way Clemson has dispatched a schedule that's not that fantastic all year long, right?
Yeah, totally. I just there's nothing about this team that screams dangerous to me. And again, you're talking about Texas and the number one ranked defense in the country according to Sharp College Football's advanced metrics. I like them to win and probably pretty comfortably. Peter, of the remaining three games, which do you think is the next least likely for an upset?
I like Ohio State, but I like Tennessee too. I think this is going to be a competitive game. I think there's a what's the line now? Is it seven
So
and a
that's
half?
that's your next least likely,
Next least
or
likely, yes,
oh,
because
okay.
I have some hope that Indiana can just go out. There's a small chance Indiana can go out and post a huge scoring total on anybody. I don't. I think that Ohio State's probably likely to take care of business
All right,
fairly.
let's talk about that game because I actually think it's the most likely upset of the four. The line is, I think, Ohio State by 7.5 right
Seven and a
now.
half now,
The
yeah.
total is 47.5, and even more than an upset, I love the under. Both teams have top 8 defenses, according to Sharp College Football. Tennessee held Alabama to 17 points, held Oklahoma to 15 points. They're coming out of a brutally tough SEC schedule, and I think they can look. Considering what Ohio State did offensively against Michigan, I love the under in this, and I think Tennessee will be right there at the end. Now, tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, I don't know that you're wrong. I think it's going to be a grind, and I know that typically when we look at giants as opposed to killers,
Hmm.
we want to make sure they have downside protection, right? We don't want to judge them by their worst moments. And Ohio State's worst moment was pretty bad,
Hmm.
but Ohio State on the whole has been extraordinarily consistent. Their week to week deviations have, in performance, especially defensively, have not been great. They're just a very consistent team and they're very high level, would have been worthy of a top 2 or 5 slot had they not blown that horrible Michigan game. I guess what I'm saying is I believe they're better than they looked against Michigan. And I just think they're a little better. I mean, I think that's what the numbers show.
All right, so then I guess you're saying that your second most likely upset is Indiana Notre Dame.
Again, just because here the variation scores are much different. Indiana is one of the most variable teams in the country week to week. That's generally been because they have been improving. They came out of nowhere, started showing up in the polls in late October, but their offense is tremendous, and you have to let a lot of air out because of their schedule. But there is,
Yes.
but it is a lot. I understand, and that's why they're deservedly a favorite. They're also a 7.5 point underdog, right? But
Well, so here's the
there is the
thing.
chance they could go light it up.
I
That's all I'm thinking.
There's a couple fun facts. First of all, in this game, uh, both these teams have top 10 offenses and top 10 defenses, according to those sharp metrics I was talking about. The only other two teams in the country who qualify for that are Ohio State and Alabama, who I know you've talked about as sort of being good enough to be in the playoff, maybe not deserving. But I think that's just a high level metrics really like both these teams. But again, it's so hard, Peter, to compare because of conference expansion and because of sort of the variations in schedules. It's getting really hard to compare teams. As we know, Indiana didn't play anyone. In the one tough game they played, they got blown out by Ohio State. But Notre Dame at least has the win over Texas A&M. They have the Louisville game winning by a touchdown, but they haven't played anyone down the stretch really either. But I think I like this Notre Dame team. I think they can play defense. Defense. I think Riley Leonard is getting better as the year goes on and he gets used to this system.
Well,
I
he's
think they're
certainly come around,
dangerous.
but Jordan, you put your finger on an important point. Who've they beaten in the past 6 weeks? I
Yep.
mean, and it is hard to compare teams, especially in this environment. But look, the teams we have serious doubts about, let's say Arizona State, Boise State. I mean,
Hmm.
you agree you can let a lot of air out of Indiana's tires before you get down to that level at all, right? I mean, Indiana's a worthy team in this slot.
They they are metrics like them, and obviously you can't argue with the margin of victory in a lot of these games, but they really haven't played anyone, and they just looked so bad in that one major test against Ohio State that it's hard to trust them. I think Notre Dame wins this one, and now your most likely upset, my second most likely upset, SMU Penn State, and this is I think more about SMU, right?
Yeah, look, we can talk about how the numbers like Indiana, but the adjust numbers however you want. And SMU has been, I mean, SMU basically entered the national rankings in early October after they beat Louisville, and then every week, nearly every week since then, they've just pulverized ACC opponents by bigger and bigger and bigger margins. I mean, in this past month, they won all their games by double digits, an average margin of victory of over 22 points. They did have the stumble, but look, I think on the merits, they're about a 35% chance I'd give them as an underdog, just looking at their points scored and allowed and how they've done over the season. They're also and again, we like this for underdogs, a very inconsistent team, mostly because they've been improving by leaps and bounds. I'll say one other thing. Unusually for a kind of a crazy college scoring, pulverize your opponent's team, they're great in the trenches. I mean, they've rushed for almost
Run
180
defense.
yards and they have allowed nothing. And those rushing stats held up against Clemson. They
did.
outrushed Clemson by a huge margin. And I'll tell you something else. Kevin Jennings is one of the top 10 passers according to passer rating in the country. Quiet season, but he put up 300 yards against Clemson.
This is another one of those situations where it's tough to measure these teams. Penn State, 30th in the country in strength of schedule. Their two best games were losses. They lost by a touchdown to Ohio State and a touchdown to Oregon. SMU, 57th in strength of schedule, really don't have many signature wins. What are you hanging your hat on? A touchdown over Louisville, 1 point over Duke. I guess 23 points over Pitt's probably their best performance.
Well,
But
yes, Pitt was undefeated going into that game and hasn't won a game since. That game destroyed a team's season. I mean, it's interesting at least.
But look, I think the thing you mentioned it, SMU's run defense means that it's all going to come down to Drew Aller. You got to like the way he looked against Oregon. That Penn State's offense hanging with Oregon is a good sign. I think Penn State prevails here, but I think you're right that SMU has the most dangerous underdog feel. And obviously, as we talked about, if you like them over Penn State, you may as well take them to make it the Final Four. Right?
Look, Jordan, these are crude numbers, okay? But I think SMU, from my back of the envelope calculations, has about a 28% chance of making the Final Four. Texas is up around 68%. Oregon's down around 50% because of the tough path they've got.
Well, you're only giving Oregon a 50% chance of beating Ohio State or Tennessee.
Yeah,
I think it's got to be better than a
I'm not.
point flip.
Okay. Well, we'll see. I'm not sure that Oregon should even be favored over Ohio State. I'm not 100% sure about that. And I think Ohio State's going to take care of Tennessee. So you just multiply those numbers out. But the point is, in college basketball, we always say, as Mom liked to say, if you like the 12 to beat the 5, you may as well like the 12 to beat the 4.
And you've got to like the idea of SMU's run defense against Ashton Genty in a potential semifinal.
I actually love to see that game, actually. Yeah.
Right. But I think Penn State wins. If I had to pick one upset, like I said, it's Tennessee. Your one upset is SMU. And from the best of college football, we'll get into the worst of the NFL right after this.
What's up, everybody? Tony here. Do you love sports betting as much as I do? Wish you can get that extra edge? Well, I've got great news for you. Masterclass, which I love, by the way, just dropped Bet Smart, Top Sports Betting Strategies, a game-changing course taught by GOATs, taught by the pros, such as Nick Costos, Captain Jack Andrews, Joe Fotenbaugh. Learn directly from the pros as they share insider secrets on managing your bankroll, spotting hidden gems, and avoiding those rookie mistakes that could cost you big. I'm always looking for useful tips and tricks to improve my bankroll and just to be a better bettor in general. That's why I took the Bet Smart Top Sports Betting Strategies class. I consider myself a pretty confident bettor when I hear Rob Pizzola, when I hear Captain Jack break down the pros and the cons of flat staking, of protecting your bankroll against bad bets, a lot of different things that we don't think about as regular bettors. I realized I wasn't betting to my full potential, and that's why I love taking this class with Masterclass. Masterclass always has great offers during the holidays, sometimes up to as much as 50%. Head over to masterclass.com/DLB for the current offer. That's up to 50% off. Masterclass.com/DLB. Masterclass.com/DLB. And remember, all sports betting involves risk, and you're responsible for complying with all sports betting laws in your jurisdiction.
We're back, and Peter, it is time for Nailed It, which, as you know, is sponsored by our partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. Peter, what's better than watching football and basketball on the weekend? Well, watching it with the DraftKings Sportsbook app in your hand, obviously. Our partner DraftKings is hooking up all new customers who bet $5 and will instantly get $150 in bonus bets. So think you can nail it? Download the app now. New customers use my promo code Underdogs and bet just $5 in any wager and get $150 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code Underdogs only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. And Peter, we nailed it a few weeks ago.
Jordan, I just want to say that the Mets nailed it, Jordan, with Juan Soto. I just want to bring that up one more time.
That mute button that I've asked for control over, Sarah, would be really helpful right now. But anyway, Peter, we nailed it a few weeks ago when we talked about in a game we called Scrappy or Crappy. The Miami Dolphins, I think, were 2-6 at that time. Mm-hmm. But we looked ahead to their schedule and we said if one team is going to come out of this,
scrap heap.
It's the scrap heap at
the crap
bottom,
heap, actually, yeah.
And make a playoff run. It was the Dolphins. Well, they beat the Rams, they beat the Raiders, they beat the Patriots, they lost to Green Bay, and then last week they almost blew this, but they came back, beat the Jets. They're sitting at 6-7. They are very much alive, which is more than you can say for a lot of teams. So can we take a little victory lap on the Dolphins at least being competitive?
I don't like to do nailed it when they're just lucky, when we got it right for no reason. But everything we said about Miami, about why they were poised to come back, Tua being healthy, pressures translating into sacks, luck improving, Jonnu Smith, right? All came true, and we're all in full effect against the hapless New York Jets, who managed to take them to overtime. But Miami won again, and it's all on evidence. If the season were 19 games, Miami would have an even better shot. I think time's going to run out on them, unfortunately. But they've had a great month, Jordan.
Critical game this week at Houston. If they can get that one, they finish with a decimated Niners team. They go to Cleveland and they go to the Jets. But they've got to get this one if they want a chance. And Peter, part of the reason why it's unusual to say that with 4 weeks left, but I want to spend the remainder of the show talking about we've got a really weird situation in the NFL this year. It's a league that has been largely defined by parity over the years, largely built by the revenue sharing model and the salary cap. But Peter, something strange is happening in the NFL neighborhood this year. Last season, at this point in the year, only 3 teams had won 3 or fewer games. This year, Peter, 8 teams are 3-10 or 2-11. 8. And then you're seeing it pronounced at the other end too, where at the top of the league, you've got 2 12-1 teams, 2 11-2 teams. Last year, no one was 12-1 or 11-2 at this point. What this is leading to is, especially in the AFC, very few teams with a month left even alive to make a playoff run. What is going on with this stratification?
Right. So when we did Scrappy or Crappy, there was a pile up at the bottom of the league with all these teams with 2 wins, right? Mm-hmm. And we talked about Miami coming out of that pack. Jordan, all of those teams have continued to lose, right? A couple of them had made some strides, like New Orleans on defense, right? But all of these teams, the Giants, Carolina, the Raiders, they're all still in dire straits. What's happened is there's an expansion of the spread between the best and the worst teams in terms of their wins. Now, I do want to point out because, and why do we always talk about luck or regression of the mean, these boring statistical things, is because when teams put too much faith just in their win-loss records, right? We saw this happen with the Giants twice in the past 5 years, or the Raiders, right? Both in our crappy category. When you don't look at the underlying stats and you think all that matters is these wins and losses in terms of how you're going to do going forward, you can get into real trouble. Some of these teams that look fantastic are very good teams, but they're still not quite as good as their records. Look, Detroit is on track to score more than 200 points more than their opponents. They're 12-1. That's a little fortunate. Vikings at 11-2. The same thing. Of course, the huge example this year is the Chiefs. You can talk all about finding ways to win, this, that, blah, blah, blah. But 12-1 at a plus 56 point differential is kind of out of control. Good luck. The same kind of thing as Jordan. I know there's not a lot of teams that should be winning but are losing or vice versa. But there are several teams at the bottom of the heap that are not quite as terrible as they look and are pretty close to turning it around.
So, Peter, of the 8 teams with 3 wins or fewer, okay?
Yes. Chicago's been outscored by 24 points, Jordan.
They have 4 wins. They're not even in that group.
Okay, well, the Jets have been outscored haven't even been outscored by 50.
There are 8 teams. All of them, with the exception of the Jets, have been outscored by at least 86 points, okay? That's not particularly fluky. 5 of them have been outscored by more than 100 points. The question to me is, why are the bad teams so bad? So look, the most obvious place to start is at quarterback, right? You look at the quarterbacks down this list, it's pretty ugly. Start with the Giants. I mean, do we even need to say the names? Daniel Jones, Tommy DeVito, and Drew Lock? The Panthers benched Bryce Young. Now, he has come back and played well after the benching, and they're one of the teams that I actually think is probably better than their record at this point. But clearly, quarterback play a problem there. The Raiders, Gardner Minshew, Desmond Ridder, Aiden O'Connell, no good. Patriots are starting a rookie in Drake May. He looks promising, but it's a rookie. The Titans have a guy in Will Levis, who we really don't know much about. The Jets have the corpse of Aaron Rodgers, who suddenly woke up last week. The Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence is hurt. It's Mac Jones. And the Browns played Deshaun Watson for far too long. Jameis Winston actually looks competitive, but it starts with quarterback, Peter, but there's another layer to this that I want to talk about this.
Well, wait. Before you go to the other layer, the quarterback is in tandem with offensive lines. I was looking at offensive line data.
Yep.
In New York, we watched the Giants. We watched Andrew Thomas for years be an outstanding player on a very poor offensive line and poor team and poor quarterback play, right? Turns out he's a real exception. Very few of these terrible teams have most of them have hardly any good linemen at all. Now, I'll say Carolina's an exception again. Carolina has 2 really good tackles and 2 really good guards. Another reason they're not that far from putting it together.
But Carolina, so the metric I was going to mention is Pro Football Focus. They have run block win rate and pass block win rate. It's a little noisy. I don't know that it fully accounts for scheme and other things the offensive line is asked to do. But the Panthers are 17th in run block win rate, which is okay, but 28th in pass block win rate. So even their line's not playing great. And this is the point I wanted to make. Of those 2 metrics, the only examples of a team even being in the top 20 in either of them, the Browns are 12th in pass block win rate. The Panthers are 17th in run block win rate. Everyone else is in the 20s in both, including the Patriots, who are 32nd in pass blocking and 31st in run blocking.
Right. Well, look, you look at teams that just look like they're collapsing on the field, that can't get it together. You can find not maybe above average quarterbacks easily. You can find replacement level quarterbacks floating around the league. We talked last year a lot about backup quarterbacks. It's very hard to find 3 or 4 linemen. If your offensive line is malfunctioning, I'm looking at Jacksonville. I'm looking at the Patriots. You're right. The Raiders and these teams. I mean, there's multiple holes to fill. You can get by. You can be a mediocre team elevated to a good or a great team with a great defensive line. But to function at all, it starts with the offensive line. Offensive line plays what all of these terrible teams have in common.
But the implication for this, I don't know if this is a trend that's going to carry forward going into the next year or two, but it means a lot for the last month of the season because it's really taking a lot of the drama out of the end of the football season, okay?
Yeah.
The AFC in particular, okay? Do you know that, Peter, 6 teams have already been eliminated from the AFC playoff race?
There's hardly any playoff chases left.
Ago. So you have your top 7.
Right.
You have your top 7 teams that are all 8-5 and better.
Right.
And then there's just 3 teams left even vying for a spot. You got the Colts at 6 and
Right.
7, the aforementioned Dolphins at 6 and 7, and the Bengals hang on by a thread at 5 and 8. That's not any drama.
Almost everyone else is completely locked in. I'll tell you something else. It has implications for, one reason why teams may be churning so much at the bottom here. It may just be injuries. When injuries drastically increase, you can function a lot worse in the season than your overall statistics. Think about young players who are given a chance to show something at the end of a season. I can't think of too many offensive linemen who've been worked into rotation successfully mid-season. Receivers can make a name for themselves. We see defensive backs come off the bench and start having great games in week 12 or 13 all the time. Same thing with running backs. It's very hard. I mean, if I were a team looking to take lessons from this, it would be to do whatever I can, including drafting for depth, to keep the offensive line healthy, because once that starts to collapse, you're just on this slide down, and you can be written out of a season really early.
Well, we can get deeper into this, maybe even in the offseason, because I do want to talk at some point about how the Lions went from the ultimate underdogs to, in some ways, the model franchise. And I think it really started with building in the trenches. I mean, that line lets them do whatever they want when they're healthy.
Eagles too, earlier than that. I mean, that's where it started.
And it's so clear that they were able to fill in the skill position pieces after the line had already been built. And if I were one of these franchises starting over, that's exactly how I would approach things. But Peter, the NFC picture is at least a little crazier, but it's mostly just races for division titles. Like the wild card, even that wild card race, it's other than maybe the Commanders hanging on to that last seed. It's just not what we've seen in the NFL in the past, where so many teams are typically alive, even going into the last week.
The bad fortune that the 49ers have suffered is leading to more wins being scattered around the rest of that division, which is creating a great divisional race, even as it lowers the win total of everybody involved, right? So you have those teams colliding out there, and the divisional winner is the only one who's going to make it. And it's going to be exciting, but it's basically because so many 49ers have been injured this year.
Yeah, well, I will continue to root for the Giants to lose, get the number 1 pick, and you may have heard sign a veteran and draft a non-quarterback. But
it's beginning to become conventional wisdom, Jordan. We'll call it the JB line.